Here's your money briefing for Wednesday, June 14th. I'm J.R. Whalen for the Wall Street Journal. Should you leave a tip for a cup of coffee or a pack of gum? Shoppers faced with tipping options on small screens at the checkout counter are choosing not to tip, and it's creating some awkward situations. Wall Street Journal personal finance reporter Oyin Adedoyin spoke to baristas and shoppers about this. So Oyin, most of us leave a tip with the waitstaff at a restaurant or the Uber driver, but when did leaving a tip with the person behind the cash register at a store become common or at least an option?
It's all about these tip screens. They are these iPad-like devices at the checkout counter that take a card payment, and they also take tips now. This is something that became really popularized during the pandemic when cash was being used less and cards were being used more. And so tap to pay was a lot more popular at these checkout screens with companies like Block, Toast, and Clover.
Yeah, usually the cashier will spin it around for the shopper.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is some of these screens have different technology. So some of them spin around, others are facing the customer the whole time. And that's something that baristas told me can impact whether or not they get a tip, too.
So why does this become awkward? If it's an option for the shopper, well, what's the issue?
Well, picture this. So you are a barista or you're a cashier and your customer goes to pay. Maybe they grab something like a little snack, a cookie, or even just a cup of black coffee. There's that awkward moment when the tip screen appears for both parties. On the barista side of things, they feel like they don't want to guilt the customer into tipping if it's just for a small thing.
They can see the tip options also on their screen?
They can definitely see it. And so sometimes they'll, avoid eye contact with the customer. They'll maybe even skip it for the customer to avoid an awkward conversation. In many instances, they told me that they have to explain to the customer how not to tip them.
What do you mean explain not to tip them?
Some of these iPad screens are formatted in a way that the option to not leave a tip is hard to find. So in these instances, baristas have to then lean over and show the customer, okay, just hit the customize button and then hit 0 and you're all good.
So what are some situations at the counter where a shopper is unlikely to leave a tip?
Baristas and these service workers told me that for things like a black cup of coffee or a muffin or something that's already pre-made, they don't usually expect a tip. But for things that are a little bit more complicated to make, like a matcha latte, for example, which has gotten a lot more popular in recent years, they actually have to hand whisk those things and measure out portions. And they feel a little bit disappointed if they don't get a tip when they have to actually make something. We're also seeing these screens at convenience stores and places where you're likely to just pick up a pack of gum or a soda. And it's really frustrating people and agitating them because these are things that already don't cost a lot. So tacking on an extra $1 or more tip just feels ridiculous for customers.
What's it like on the other side of the screen? Now, you mentioned that the service personnel, they see the tip amount and they see the percentage choices that people have. But do they seem to anticipate scenarios where things might get a little awkward?
Yeah. Baristas have told me that they always kind of anticipate the point where customers are going to have to tip, and sometimes that'll cause them to skip the option altogether so that customers don't feel awkward, maybe if they're only getting one item or something like that. Other times, especially when they are serving young customers who maybe, have their parents' card or are borrowing money from someone, they won't expect that person to tip. So in these cases, they'll maybe turn to make the order as soon as they flip that screen around just to avoid any kind of interaction.
Oh, so there's some tension in the air.
Yes. It's definitely a tense situation. It's not easy.
All right, so the shopper is staring at tipping options. The barista or the cashier is looking to see what tipping percentage might be selected, or they turn their back to diffuse the situation. And then, like you said, there's guilt on people's shoulders.
Absolutely. Customers are feeling guilty because they understand that it's not the worker's fault that these screens are there. And this is something that I heard when I spoke with professors as well as etiquette experts on this topic, too. So there's a little bit of that weighing the option of, should I help out this kid who's working behind the register, or is this just not worth leaving a tip at all? And usually it's the worker's job to kind of decide for the customer, am I going to just skip this so that they don't have to deal with it? Or am I going to maybe explain to them how this works?
Now, in your reporting, you wrote about the fact that there are generous tippers out there.
Yeah.
Who is most likely to tip regardless of how much is being purchased?
Funny enough, a store manager at a bubble tea shop in Harlem told me that usually people who walk in with their little puppies are more likely to tip. And she was saying that that's because everyone gets really excited when they see a dog owner come in with their dog. And it usually starts up a good banter and conversation. And she's noticed that when she's got a good banter going with a customer, she's most likely to get a good tip. She also told me that she speaks Spanish. And so when customers are coming in who also speak Spanish, speaking with them and helping them order in that language usually gives her a better tip as well.
So it's dogs and speaking Spanish is the key here.
Yeah, and conversations. It's that good banter.
Now, it might be funny to talk about all the squirming going on here, but the tips are important for the worker's bottom line, right?
Yeah, it is. In many states, there's something called a tipped wage. And because these screens have really increased the number of tips that these workers are seeing and these establishments are getting, it can mean that these businesses don't have to pay their workers as much. For example, in New York, the minimum wage is $15, but businesses can pay their workers $10 if tips make up the rest of that $15. And so that means that it's less cost for the business, but maybe if tips are not coming up to that $15 level, it could also hurt the workers.
So, Oyin, there's all this conflicting energy going on. But what power does the consumer have in this situation?
In reporting this story, I saw that it's not that consumers don't want to tip, but the issue is they usually don't know where the tip is going. And they had a valid point because it's almost like the wild, wild west with these businesses. They can choose how they want to distribute their tips. Some distribute it evenly across their workers. Some maybe take a portion and distribute the rest of it to their workers. Some maybe even distribute it by the hours that a server or barista has worked. And so it's really hard to tell how these tips are going to be distributed and whether or not, that tip that you left for your barista is actually going to go to your barista. And in these cases, I've been told by workers that it's really helpful to tip in cash, if possible, because they're going to divvy out those tips before they leave for the shift.
Oh, something like an old-fashioned tip jar on the counter?
So that might be in a jar on the counter. That might be something that you give to the cashier or the barista directly. The physical dollar is the easiest and simplest way to make sure that your tip is getting to who you're intending for it to get to.
That's Wall Street Journal personal finance reporter Oyin Adedoyin. And that's your Money Briefing. I'm J.R. Whalen for the Wall Street Journal.